we're going we're going to record the presentation part of the webinar, but we won't record the Q&A and discussion afterwards. So you can feel free to ask whatever you want, and know that that won't be recorded for the world. This webinar is brought to you by the National Institute for Early Education Research, which is at Rutgers. We're an independent, nonpartisan research and analysis organization that focuses on early childhood policy, birth to 8. For 7 years, we housed the U.S. Department of Education's Technical Assistance Center for States on early learning, birth to 8, and we work very closely with states. My name is Steve Barnett. I'm the founder and a co-director of NEAR. We're also joined by Dr. Allison Friedman-Krause, who leads our state policy survey efforts. And we have 2 distinguished guests, Clayton Birch, who's the West Virginia State Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. Barbara Cooper, who's Alabama's Secretary of Early Childhood Education. I think the importance of this is demonstrated by the willingness of these 2 very, very busy people to take their time to be with us here today and to participate in the discussion with you. I'm delighted that they've agreed to do that. Without further ado, let's move right into a very short presentation, which then will be followed by some brief presentations by Secretary Cooper and Superintendent Birch. I want to start off by talking a little bit about how many children are in pre-K. Pre-K defined very broadly as any kind of center-based program in early childhood. The lines between childcare and pre-K and preschool and Head Start are far from clear. And you'll see more about that. But if we just count all of the kids, it's about 5 million of the 8 million 3- and 4-year-olds. So that's about 60%. And you can see distinctly more of those are in public than in private programs. And as I'll make clear, that also is less clear than it seems, because really that refers to funding, not necessarily where a child sits. If you could move on, next slide, Allison. Now, this gets much more complicated once we start taking it apart. These data are from a nationally representative survey that NEAR has been doing, starting at the very beginning of the pandemic and getting pre-pandemic data and moving through to the present. But they're entirely consistent with data from the CPS on school enrollment. And so you can see 3-year-olds are much less likely than 4-year-olds, right? Just about a 50% versus 70%. Children vary by income in their participation rate. Children are much more likely to attend at high income rates. At low to moderate income rates, it's actually fairly flat, but one thing you can discern from this is less than half the 3- and 4-year-olds in poverty attend any kind of preschool program. If we break this out by ethnicity, our survey numbers are maybe a little lower than the national ones for African American and Asian kids. I think statistically they're not different from white non-Hispanic kids, but Hispanic kids are less likely to attend preschool. And as we've dug into that, that seems to be as much or more related to where the children live and what they have access to than it is to a differential preference by ethnicity for preschool. After all, Mexico has universal pre-K. Next slide, Allison.
Is it not showing up?
It is not showing up.
Okay, hold on. Now?
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that.
And here we give you a brief look at, so what did the pandemic do to preschool access? You can see on the left the pre-pandemic levels, and on the right at two different time periods, first in the spring, later in the fall after there's been some rebound. And you can see preschool was devastated. There was some rebound, and of course this was very different state by state. But overall, we did not get back to within 20% of normal by the end of the calendar year. And even less than that if you look at in-person attendance versus remote. And remote early care and education is very difficult to do. It's 74% of the parents tell us they were frustrated with this arrangement. It's not surprising. It's very difficult to do early learning virtually. Next slide. Now here I want to give you a further idea of just how complex this is in terms of where children are. This looks at enrollment by funding, breaking it out by 3- and 4-year-olds. If we look at 3-year-olds, the most common setting and funding is private, followed by Head Start, then by state pre-K and preschool special education. If we move over to 4-year-olds, you can see that state-funded pre-K and a smaller slice of local, that's mostly school district programs, are the largest sector serving kids, followed by the private sector, then Head Start and early childhood special education. So where children are and who pays for them, very different between 3- and 4-year-olds. Now, to add to the complexity, next slide. The mixed delivery system is much, much bigger in early care and education, even for 3- and 4-year-olds, than it is for K-12. 40% of children in state-funded pre-K are in private providers. Sometimes people lose sight of the fact the vast majority of Head Starts are in private providers. And so this question of are kids in private or public is, and from one perspective, you could say they're mostly in private programs that have public funding and governance, though, especially at 4, not at 3. Why is this the case? If we look at state pre-K, states will tell you it allows them to do much more rapid expansion. It facilitates blending with Head Start and with child care subsidy funding. Most of these go to private providers. It avoids disrupting the private sector childcare. We don't want to make things worse for any child, whether or not they're participating in a public program. We don't want to disrupt the arrangements parents have been using. We want to ensure that they're high quality in state-funded pre-K. And finally, it offers a bigger scope for choice. Now, how do they do this? It varies as much as anything else does by state. Some states directly contract with and support private providers. In other states, the funds go to a county or to a local education agency that is a school district who contracts with and supports private providers. Well, I've given you the advantages of this, which are many. There are also some concerns. Right? If this isn't carefully done, the combination of public and private sectors can create two-tier systems where there's lower pay and lower standards in the private sector programs. That's certainly not providing equal access to quality for kids when we do that. And it's not fair to the people in the private sector. And then there is a concern that children may lose their legal rights and protections if it's not firmly part of public education. If it's part of public education, then children have constitutional rights to, in some states, actually to receive the service, in others to what the quality of the service is, and sometimes both. And now I'm going to turn it over to Allison, who's going to pick up on what exactly do we mean by quality and why does it matter?
Great, thank you, Steve. So we know there's been lots of research about what quality preschool is and why it's important. We have research that shows positive and lasting impacts on children from attending high quality preschool, including on school readiness, achievement, and educational attainment. Research has also suggested that attending quality preschool can reduce grade repetition, special education placement, and crime, and in the long run also increase earnings and improve health. However, in order to produce these both short and long-term impacts, the preschool programs must be of high quality. And unfortunately, most large-scale public preschool programs today are not of high enough quality or sufficient enough intensity or dosage to produce these desired outcomes that we've seen in the research. So things like Abecedarian and Perry preschool program, amongst others, are high quality, have provided intensity in multiple years, full day programs. And from those studies, we've seen these long-lasting positive impacts. But many of the publicly funded preschool programs today are far from those model programs. On the other hand, there are a few publicly funded preschool programs in a small number of states and cities that do have evidence of substantial and persistent effects on children's learning and school success. So one example is here in New Jersey, our Abbott preschool program. And Steve's recent work shows that that program has lasting impacts on student achievement through high school, with larger impacts for children who attended for 2 years than for 1 year. But these positive outcomes aren't guaranteed, and some research has found null or even negative effects of preschool on children's outcomes, which points to why we really need to emphasize quality in early childhood education. So that leads to the next question: what is high quality preschool? There's many ways that the quality preschool has been defined, but one way of thinking about it is often divided into 2 buckets: so structural quality and process quality. And structural quality includes program features like resources for strong teachers, small class sizes, low staff to child ratios, strong curriculum with supports for implementation, and a variety of learning materials in the classroom. Process quality is more about the interactions that occur between children and teachers. So in a classroom characterized by high process quality, you would see frequent, rich, in-depth interactions between teachers and children, among the children themselves, and the children interacting with the learning materials. And structural quality is often thought of as a necessary precursor to high levels of process quality. So without these fundamental structural supports in place, it's really hard to achieve high levels of process quality. And then in our annual State of Preschool report, NEAR has developed a checklist of 10 state policies that support both structural and process quality. These are our 10 benchmarks for minimum program quality that we think are necessary, though not necessarily sufficient, for a high quality preschool program. So these on this slide now are the 10 benchmarks that we use in our State of Preschool yearbook that address, as I mentioned, both the structural and process quality. We recently actually changed our benchmarks about 5 years ago now to move a little bit more towards the process quality side of things that wasn't as represented in our original set of 10 benchmarks. So I'll walk through these pretty quickly and happy to answer questions later about them. The first one is that states are required to have a comprehensive early learning and development set of standards. Comprehensive means that they include a variety of domains of learning. We want them to be aligned with standards for younger children and older children, as well as with preschool child assessments. We want to see the state supporting their use, their implementation through things like professional development, technical assistance, training, and that they're culturally sensitive. So something like including standards for dual language learners, or including standards for incorporating children's home cultures or home languages in the classroom. The second benchmark is about curriculum implementation. And this isn't that we're saying states need to have one specific curriculum. We want states to have a system for helping programs select a curriculum. a process for doing that. And then once the curriculum is selected, have a system in place to support implementation. So technical assistance, training on the curriculum, things like that. We want to see that lead teachers have at least a bachelor's degree in early childhood education or child development or a related field, and assistant teachers have at least a CDA or the equivalent. For both assistant and lead teachers, we want them to have at least 15 hours of professional development each year, individualized annual professional development plans, and to receive coaching or some sort of classroom embedded support on a somewhat regular basis. We want to see class sizes no larger than 20 with a 1-to-10 staff teacher to child ratio. And then we also require that all preschoolers receive vision and hearing screenings, as well as one other health screening. And that if children screen positive for anything, that they are required to then receive a referral for services. And our last benchmark is about continuous quality improvement. For this benchmark, we require states to conduct structured classroom quality observations systematically in all classrooms, or in some sort of randomly selected set of classrooms. And that information collected from those classroom observations is used at both the local program level and the state level for quality improvement. This slide now shows the number of our 10 quality standard benchmarks met by each state-funded preschool program. And for states that have more than one preschool program, which is many of them, the states color coded based on a weighted average number of benchmarks and the number of children enrolled in each program. The greener states are higher quality, meeting more benchmarks. The redder states are meeting fewer benchmarks. So Alabama, Hawaii, Michigan, Mississippi, Rhode Island, and one of the programs in Missouri all meet 10 of our benchmarks. Unfortunately, less than 10% of children in state-funded preschool are enrolled in programs that meet 9 or 10 of our benchmarks. And on the other hand, 40% of children are in programs meeting less than half of the benchmarks. Some of the largest programs, like those in Texas, Florida, and then California's transitional kindergarten program, meet the fewest number of benchmarks, which is also concerning. So why is quality so low in so many places? Well, funding is one problem. It's a barrier to increasing quality. With limited funding that the states have, they're often forced to make trade-offs between expanding access to more children or improving quality. And there are only a few states that really have been able to successfully balance both of those things, expanding access while either improving or maintaining high quality. And as Steve mentioned, you'll be hearing from 2 of them, Alabama and West Virginia, shortly. Currently, 35 states spend less than $3,000 per low-income child in their state. So here we estimated, we took the amount of state funds in total going to preschool in each state and divided it by the number of low-income 3- and 4-year-olds in that state. So it's not the number of children in preschool, but just in the state. And most states are spending less than $3,000 per child, which shows that to get to even a targeted program for all low-income children, states have a really long way to go to increase funding. And even if you look at funding per child enrolled in preschool, many states are spending less than $3,000 per child, which is also concerning. NEAR's estimated that a high-quality full-day program costs over $12,000 per child, and most states are far from this level, even when adjusting for the cost of living in that state, because we know a dollar goes a lot further in some states than others. We also see that there's been minimal progress in increasing access for 3- and 4-year-olds when looking at state-funded preschool and Head Start combined. So that's what is shown in this figure here. If you look at the biggest light blue bar, you'll see that there has been some progress in increasing access to state-funded preschool for 4-year-olds, but that's sort of offset by a decline in the number of 4-year-olds enrolled in Head Start. So at the current growth rate, the US may not be able to reach all low-income 3- and 4-year-olds even in this century. So not to mention trying to achieve a universal program. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve to introduce our next speakers.
Okay. So next we have Barbara Cooper from Alabama. Both of these states, Alabama and West Virginia, she'll be followed by Clayton Burge, are are examples that stand out because they do have strong funding per pupil. They do have high quality standards. Both primarily serve 4-year-olds, but they're not just thinking about 4-year-olds, as I'm sure they'll make clear. Both of them have mixed delivery systems that are well thought out and are great examples of how this can work well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Cooper.
If you can unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. You would think we've done this enough by now, right, with the pandemic. I appreciate the opportunity today to speak with you today about the Alabama First Class Pre-K program. Our department was actually formed as the Department of Children's Affairs in 2000. In 2015, the name changed to the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education, or ADECE, to actually reflect the growing need to focus on the early childhood years of birth through age 8. Other states have followed our example, and currently I understand we are one of 6 states with a separate early childhood agency focused on pre-K. Now, within the ADECE is actually the Office of School Readiness, which is recognized across the state and nation as a leader in providing high quality pre-K. I'm frequently asked if Alabama's pre-K program is among others that are #1 in the nation, and my response is yes. We have consistently reached all near benchmarks, as Steve and Allison have indicated, for 15 consecutive years. And our rigorous evaluation of the First Class Pre-K program continues to show among these indicators that Allison demonstrated and spoke about, that children who actually participate in our program based on our data are ready for kindergarten. They're more proficient in reading and math in the later grades. They're less likely to be retained in a grade, to be chronically absent, to need special education, and they're less likely to have disciplinary issues throughout their school careers. We have data that demonstrates that this continues over the span of these children who actually have an opportunity to participate. These results are only made possible because of our continuous gubernatorial support and bipartisan commitment to invest in our youngest learners. Our goal, as well as the broad base of supporters in Alabama, is to ensure that Alabama's children have access to this high-quality voluntary pre-K program. We have remained consistent with the plan that was established by NEAR, the Business Council of Alabama, and the Alabama School Readiness Alliance in 2012 to have this annual incremental growth until 70% of our state's 4-year-olds are able to access the First Class Pre-K program. We believe 70% access will provide those families who actually want pre-K for their child this opportunity to attend. Our goal is to reach 70% by 2026, and this is what the funding is allowing us to work towards. The primary reason we've chose incremental growth is to ensure that we can protect the quality standards that we know lead to children's success in pre-K and beyond. We want to make sure that we're able to grow the workforce to meet the demands as we continue to expand. The quality benchmarks that NEAR has established and Allison spoke to, we know are based on research and are proven to provide the structures that are necessary for children to be successful in their learning and development. One of the biggest reasons that the First Class Pre-K program is different from K-12 systems is that we meet children where they are and apply developmentally appropriate practices in our classrooms and implement the Alabama Early Learning Standards. Young children, particularly 4-year-olds, are often in some form of care than a school. Our classrooms are found in places other than elementary and primary schools in the public system. Our mixed delivery system actually allows us the flexibility to fund classrooms in faith-based organizations, Head Start facilities that we are really working towards and working with to try to expand our outreach efforts for more Head Starts, The mixed delivery system is also in private child care centers, community organizations, universities, private schools, charter schools, as well as the public schools. The department funds these classrooms with strict stipulations outlined in a memorandum of understanding that details the expectations such as teacher education, teacher pay, facility needs, operating hours, and other indicators of quality that we do not want them to veer from. We don't just do a check off at the beginning and end of the year, but we actually assign a monitor who checks in regularly with each of our programs and provides the support they need to ensure that these expectations are met throughout the year. Although there were almost 2,500 lead and auxiliary teachers in first-class pre-K classrooms this past year, none work directly for our department. They are actually employed and supervised by the partner entities within the mixed delivery systems that receive the funding. However, a very important matter for us is that each of these classrooms has a coach who works directly with the teachers to not only ensure expectations are met, but to implement a strengths-based coaching model that helps these teachers to develop and grow. We have not had as many issues with teacher shortages because we have been very proactive in many ways to prepare the workforce that we need for expanding our programs. We work with our universities to begin offering degrees in early childhood education or strengthen their existing degree programs so that students graduate and are actually ready to teach. We also utilize federal funding to provide scholarships for particularly our auxiliary teachers to help us grow the profession. Each lead teacher is expected to take part in at least 30 hours of professional development annually, and the auxiliary teachers participate in at least 20 hours. Our biggest issue is that our teachers are often so well developed that the ones employed in LEAs are often asked to move into K through third grade classrooms. So we continue to work to help our educators know that these teachers have been specifically prepared to work in early classroom environments. Our department has approximately 200 staff members, most of whom are coaches and monitors, and they're actually in the field offering that direct instructional support in pre-K classrooms. We're organized in the department into 8 regions. Each region has a regional director, and they're supported by a small but mighty staff here in the Montgomery office. In the most recently completed school year, we supported 1,238 classrooms and anticipate serving children through more than 1,367 pre-K classrooms in the upcoming year. Currently, each organization who partners with us will contribute at least 25% towards funding their program. The maximum funding amount for a new classroom is $120,000, and in subsequent years, it's around $96,000. We are actually currently in the process of re-examining our funding structure we use to provide our services. In the past, we had extremely high demand with limited state dollars, so we stretched those dollars to serve as many classrooms as possible. Now we are actually facing the fact that sustainability of the program at the provider level is something we must address, and we are hearing from these providers that more is needed as we deal with inflation and other things that cause these costs to go up. This past school year, we had the capacity to serve 37% of 4-year-olds in Alabama, but thanks to the support of our Governor Kay Ivey and our legislative leaders, we've received $24 million of an increase for fiscal year 2022 that actually allows us to give access to 44% of Alabama's 4-year-olds. In closing, I'd like to just share, we are committed to ensure all children in Alabama, particularly those in underserved areas, are ready for school success. But we realize we must have this focus on high quality in both the structural as well as the process quality. Our department accomplishes all of our work through the first class pre-K program, our first teacher home visiting program, which we realized was extremely critical during the pandemic, And we have many other collaborative efforts, including we're now focused on administering the QRIS system, which will allow us to build that quality in birth through age 5 classrooms that we've experienced in our first class pre-K classrooms. We're committed to ensuring that our programs continue to maintain this high quality and that we're good stewards of the funds that we receive. I appreciate this opportunity certainly to speak about the first class pre-K program. We work with states across the country to share what we're doing, to learn from them, because we recognize that we can always continue to build upon this work. Our key message is investing in Alabama's youngest learners is the right work to do to grow our future workforce. Having spent almost 25 years before my current calling in K-12, I know this is the right work to do. I also had an opportunity to participate in one of the first Head Start graduating classes many years ago and know personally the benefits of investing in Alabama's youngest children and families. I am glad to take any questions when appropriate, and I'm honored also to be joined again by Clayton Birch, who we've been on panels before. And again, we continue to learn from others who are doing this work to grow the early learning investment. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll switch it over to Clayton. I'll get your slides up.
Thank you, Allison. Allison, if you don't mind, I think we're just gonna, if you just put the second slide up, I can do probably the majority of it from that.
Sure.
I actually, Steve, I really enjoy going after Dr. Cooper. And for this panel, I think it just makes so much sense, because I think what I'm going to share is that our overall mission and vision is exactly the same as Alabama's. We want all children to have access to high quality early childhood experiences. But I think what you'll see in West Virginia versus Alabama, we've both taken a different approach to it, but with the end, high quality is what we want at the end. And a couple of things you'll see in common with Dr. Cooper's presentation and speaking on universal pre-K is what Steve said in the beginning is we do have a high focus on collaboration, mixed delivery. We understand, and you'll see on this slide, that there is a sensitivity that Dr. Cooper alluded to when it comes to time and capacity. And there's this balance that as you design and build these really high quality access for all, that you've really got to consider funding versus quality. And as you grow, keeping the quality consistent. So in West Virginia, we went a little different than maybe the Alabama model. The governance structure and how we started is a little different. We actually have a state code in 2002 that basically said we are going to build a universal pre-K system in West Virginia. It is going to be for all 4-year-olds. It's interesting to hear Dr. Cooper talk about target numbers that we've all leaned on the National Institute of Early Education Research for, as they track all states' efforts, knowing that about 70 to 75%, I would love for it to be more, but we know that when you offer to all, we're seeing in West Virginia after nearly 20 years of doing this, that's about where the target remains. So when that code was built, a couple interesting things happened. One, we did build in a 10-year plan to have full access for all 4-year-olds, and that was actually targeted for 2012-13. While that happened, we also wanted to address funding. Now, this is where it's interesting that we took the approach, we wanted our funding to be secure, a state investment, and we actually built our funding in West Virginia for 4-year-olds into our state aid funding formula for K-12, which means that our pre-K funding is funded at the exact same level as our K-12 classrooms. Now, Allison and Steve, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong on this. And people think, wow, what a great idea, West Virginia, secure funding, putting it at the level as your K-12. But what most folks don't understand is that funding is nowhere near what West Virginia needed to reach high quality. As a matter of fact, if we just look at state funding in preschool for West Virginia, we would probably rank somewhere around 16, 17, 18, I don't know, for funding per child. But because of our mixed delivery system and our collaborative efforts with governance, we actually jumped from about 16th in the nation to about 4th in the nation for funding, because we realized the states cannot do it alone. And I love what Dr. Cooper said, meeting children where children are. We did not want to undermine the needs of families in the state of West Virginia. So as you'll see on this slide in that middle section, we actually rely very heavily on a shared governance system in West Virginia. Yes, it is a state board of education policy. Yes, it is state aid funded for the majority of the dollars, but it took us many, many years to make our school systems realize they are not going to run these preschool systems, and we're going to model that at the state level. So DHHR, Head Start, and the Department of Education actually collaborate. They do a shared governance system. We expect all of our 55 counties to also model that shared governance system, which means really looking at how to invest dollars, private partners, whether they be childcare, Head Start, faith-based. And in the actual state code, we expected 50% of all classrooms in the state of West Virginia to be in a collaborative model or location. You jump forward to 2020, 2021, West Virginia now is sitting at about 82% of all of its classrooms in the state of West Virginia are in a collaborative model. And that could be with Head Start, childcare, private providers. And it's just after years of doing this and folks understanding that if you want the high quality, you need the partners. You got to be able to do it with partners. Mixed delivery was the only way it really worked for West Virginia. And lo and behold, we have a 50% minimum. 82% is where we're at today. And I think that just really shows that once the school systems, the child care partners, and the Head Starts really begin to work together and be supported, what they find is that they can offer more access, higher quality, sustained when they do it together. And that's just worked well in West Virginia. As Dr. Cooper also alluded to, continuous quality improvement you cannot ignore. We're very appreciative. I think myself, Dr. Cooper, and other states do rely on the National Institute for Early Education Research when they have these checklists and these indicators that research really shows makes an impact. In the state of West Virginia, that has driven through 4 governors now, Steve, I believe. I don't know how many legislative sessions. So that idea that we continue getting bipartisan support, no matter who the governor is, no matter if there's a shift in our legislation, they really see the impact. Now, because we've been doing this since 2002, I would love to say we would only rely on New Jersey's Abbott preschool research data to really show us the impact of pre-K. But we want to know, if we're doing this for 20 years in West Virginia, is it really mimicking anything they saw in New Jersey or Chicago or some of these other major studies? So in 2020, we wrapped up our 5-year longitudinal study, which I guess Allison has not wrapped up. I think we're going to continue it with you all because the data was actually shocking. And we should have expected it. Preschools are doing a really, really good job, as you heard from Dr. Cooper, as they have in Alabama. Children are ready for school. Our pre-K and kindergarten seem to be meshing, really having a focused effort on school readiness. And what we're now seeing, and luckily in West Virginia, this is part of the K-12 system, because preschool is now in West Virginia influencing our grades 1, 2, and 3. And in years in the past, I've been doing this for 25 years in West Virginia, we've always, looked at preschool having this really big impact, and we never really knew why we were seeing a dip sometimes leading to 3rd grade. Is it fade out? Is our preschools, are they not as good as we thought they were? And not throwing our grades 1 and 2 under the bus, but what we're really finding in West Virginia is our grades 1 and 2 are just not equipped, and also not, they don't have the same level of expectations we've placed on our pre-K and kindergartens. So in West Virginia, we are doing an entire revamp of our grades 1, 2, and 3, and it's actually being influenced over the last 20 years on our preschool work. It's that important in West Virginia, and we're having that much success. Allison, if you could just go to the 3rd slide, and I know that I wanted to share this because, and this is a lot, I'm not going to read this, we can share it with folks. But we actually see preschool as only one of about 4 components in West Virginia of what we really need to do to really solve our long-term efforts in the state. Preschool was right there in the middle, third column over universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. Everything I've talked about, the same things you've heard Dr. Cooper talk about, that's our effort in 4-year-olds. That is the funding, the blended model, the 70%, 76% access. What you see there, though, is to us, it still only represents a piece of the overall model for West Virginia that we're going to begin working on. Our 0 to 3, I'll be the first one as a state superintendent to say I'm trying to advocate for dollars, support, quality for our 0 to 3 program. We are going to be working hand in hand with DHHR in West Virginia to put more emphasis, more funding, more quality into our 0 to 3. The second column is we have never lost sight that we recognize in West Virginia we might have tackled the 4-year-olds, but we have a large gap in West Virginia for our 3-year-olds. I think our child care partners and Head Start partners that do collaborate with West Virginia Universal Pre-K, they've done a pretty good job of pulling in 3-year-olds where we can, but West Virginia's next step is to really hone in and focus on universal access for 3-year-olds. And then finally on that is what we're currently working on, and that's our grades 1 and 2. We have a lot of work to do in West Virginia to replicate the successes of our pre-K and kindergarten in grades 1 and 2. But for West Virginia, you know, the bottom line to kind of close it out for Dr. Burnett and Allison is universal pre-K next year will reach the 20-year mark that we passed legislation, began to work on it. We're so proud of where we are, but it was never done in isolation. Without NEAR, without Head Start, without our local child care partners, it just would not be at the success level it was in West Virginia. And as proud as we are of it, I still think it represents a lot of work to do in the early care and education continuum in the state.
Well, thank you, Clayton. Thank you, Dr. Cooper. I'm going to, too many things to do. I'm going to turn off the recording.